everyone. I'm Lisa DeSisto. I'm the publisher of the Portland Press Herald. Thank you for joining us today on this beautiful spring day. Oh my gosh, it's the worst. But we figured if we talked about our challenges for hiring for the summer tourist season, that the sun would have to come out. So let's see if we can make that happen in the next 45, 50 minutes. Okay, so we have a great panel this morning, and we wouldn't be here if not for the support of our sponsors. So I wanted to acknowledge all of them. Cross Insurance, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, Katahdin Trust, Maine Jobs, Mimic, Otelco, Veril Dana, and Whipfley McPage. Let us give them a round of applause. And we are also so thankful to have Kevin from Coffee by Design with us this morning. They support us at our Like a Boss series, and I was just delighted to see Kevin in that delicious coffee, because nothing warms you up like a cup of Coffee by Design. So I hope everyone walks away today with a couple of great tips on some new strategies for hiring seasonal help. And with that, I turn it over to Press Herald business reporter Pete McGuire to lead our panel. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad you can make it out. I know it's hard to work up the motivation on days like this. Might be tempting to hit the snooze button a couple times, so I'm glad you didn't. We have a good panel this morning. Seasonal workforce issues are something that I feel like I've been covering almost in perpetuity since I started covering this beat about 3 years ago. And Maine's unemployment rate is, I think in March it was about 3.4%. In Cumberland County, that's down to 2.9%. We have businesses, especially in some of the resort towns in York County and further up the coast, talking about having to close, having to shut down hours of business, hours of work, because they can't find enough people to do this. Compounding that has been this very valuable foreign worker visa program that continues to be very tumultuous. It's hard to get a grasp on whether or not you're going to get your workers, if you're going to get them on time. And it's around 2,200, I think, workers that get applied for per year, really form a backbone for the state. So we've talked about these issues for years and years now. But we kind of wanted to flip the script and talk about what people are doing to actually address it. And there are some programs out there that I think are having some, I would say, limited success right now and probably could be boosted. So we have a great panel. We're going to talk about this today and hopefully maybe come up or talk about what people are doing to solve this problem. So to my left here, we have Laura Dolce. She is the director of the Kennebunk Port Arundel Chamber of Commerce. She has been since 2015. Prior to that, she was a columnist and former editor of the York County Coast Star, and that's and the York Weekly. Is that right? And as it's the 9th largest chamber in the state, they hold an annual job fair every year. And for the past 2 years now, they have held a job fair specifically at retired workers or retirees who might be interested in part-time seasonal jobs. Right next to her is Greg Dugal. He's was the president and CEO, of the Maine Innkeepers Association and then the Maine Restaurant Association, and now he is the Director of Government Affairs for HospitalityMaine, which is a merger of those two trade groups. Prior to that, he's been involved in the tourism industry for almost 35 years. He was the Food and Beverage Director and Director of Sales and Marketing at the Samoset Resort. And has been involved in the Chamber of Commerce all over the state, as well as, the International Society of Hotel Association Executives, where he's the past chair. And right next to him is Allyson Cavaretta. Allyson is part of the owning family for the Meadowmere Resort in Ogunquit. She served on the Ogunquit Chamber of Commerce, Ogunquit Heritage Museum boards, assisted Andean Health and Development in Ecuador, and is a member of the University of Notre Dame Business Council, of which she is a graduate. She's received the Governor's Award for Environmental Excellence, Innovation Award from the Institute of Family-Owned Businesses, and formal recognition from the state legislature. She is also one of my go-to people to talk about H-2B visas, so I'm very glad that she's here this morning.
You're most welcome.
So we can just start out, and I'd just like to take a temperature from you guys. Like I said, the unemployment rate is below 4%. It's almost historically low, and it's been like this for a while. So what does that mean for hiring when you need to ramp up? I think, the state of Maine goes from about, just in the hospitality sector, goes from about, 56,000 workers to about 86 to the summer season. So you have to hire really, really fast, and you have to hire a lot of people. So how is this affected? And Allyson, you can take it away.
Sure. So I've spoken to this issue, and I often like to throw this out there because I think it quantifies how challenging what you just said is. So in York County, the last census had 199,000 people that had started breathing but haven't stopped yet. And that's the total population. And if you take the 2.5% unemployment that it is in that county, and it's been hovering around that number, and do the math, it's 5,000 people that are alive that are not employed. And some of those people are going to be kids, like 1-year-olds. And some of those people are going to be elderly, like 99-year-olds. And so not all of them are eligible. But even if every single one of those people were, there's 5,000 restaurant seats in Algonquin and 2,500 hotel rooms. And we have to do it for the whole county, including the Kennebunk port. So that's the challenge. The numbers don't work, which is why when you look at hiring for seasonality in our industry, it's a layered cake. You need multiple avenues to arrive at it, and that's true whether the program around foreign workers is functioning or not. And so I think that's a really good way to sort of open that dialogue and say the math in a lot of these places is really restrictive. And even if you were to double the unemployment rate to 5%, again, that's 10,000 people. We have a numbers concern.
Yeah. And if I could, and it's good that you're here, Greg, because you can offer kind of a state perspective. But I'm interested, this isn't just, we have a lot of hospitality representatives here. I don't think this is just a hospitality and service industry. This is landscaping, construction workers, retail, it's across the board. So, you have a bunch of these different industries that are really seasonal in nature, competing for pretty much the same pool of workers. But Greg, is this a problem that's confined to York County, Cumberland County, the coasts, or is it across the board, would you say?
I would say it's across the board. I'm going to admit it to everybody, I'm getting old. And so is everybody that's my age. And anybody that's 10 years either side of me, people are starting to think differently. So there's a whole cohort of baby boomer individuals that are moving on to either retirement or a reduced role in our economics. So it's obviously it's a generation that maybe had a different approach to work ethic, to employment in general, and so we're looking at a totally different scenario. To your point about what happens around the state. We were at a meeting at the Maine DOL about this with a gentleman from Bar Harbor that operates several properties. In 10 years, they have hundreds of positions. This probably plays to the question of well, why don't you just hire local people? Why aren't you just hiring people in the state? Why don't you just pay more? So this individual has probably 10 properties in Bar Harbor, and in 10 years had 3 people apply for hundreds of positions that he had put out there. I've had an innkeeper member. I live in the Camden area. I saw one of my members at the store on Saturday, and he had 4 interviews set up on Saturday, and nobody showed up. None of the 4. And so it's not only a challenge of lack of individuals and just population density in some areas, it's also a challenge of getting people engaged, making sure that you're not just the guy that puts an ad in the newspaper and hopes that somebody shows up, because those days are definitely gone. There is no news. Not the online version of PressHerald.com, excuse me. And people still do that. I mean, they still put, obviously put ads in the newspaper. But, I mean, the generation that is our workforce in the hospitality industry, or mostly, really responds in different ways. So this is an issue all around the state. It's more acute on the coast. And certainly it isn't just tourism-centric areas like Algonquin and Bar Harbor. It's also places like Blue Hill and Castine, where there may be 2 or 3 small inns, and the demographic is even worse than what Allyson described. There's just, no people of working age that still live there. They're either retired or they've moved there, and at the end of their lives. And so it makes it very challenging. And when we lose 10 of them, let alone 500 to 1,000 of them, it's a critical issue.
Right.
Yeah, and I think people forget that, my family's been in business for 3 generations here in Maine. In the 1950s, my grandfather had the pharmacy in the center of town of Algonquin. And he was sort of sold that idea because he could bring his family up for July 4th, and then Labor Day he could close up the pharmacy. I mean, it's a pharmacy, and nobody would care. Nobody really lived there, and those B&Bs in those towns that are that seasonal and driven, their ability to bring 20 people to stay there floats the boat for the summer. Just like 80 years ago. That worked in Algonquin, and Algonquin was just that seasonal, and now it's just longer. So you take that away, and it's even more detrimental in the Blue Hills of the world. So it's even where it's big, in the places that it's small, it's something that has to be addressed. It has an incredible impact.
If I could add too, I think that the season itself, and our season starts earlier in the spring, goes straight through the end of the year now. Mm-hmm. So it used to be that you could have an employee and they could, come for the summer, and you could rely a lot more on your high school and college kids. But with the seasons themselves pushing, on both sides, the shoulders are much broader. But we have so many more people coming and staying later, and having so much more depth and just way more events and activities and more people coming. You need employees much deeper into the season, much earlier in the season, and that creates another issue all its own.
And the Kennebunks have Prelude, which is a big wintertime
festival. Yeah, so those businesses are going to stay open through Prelude.
Laura, Greg mentioned that the state is old and all these communities are old, but you guys have actually found that's a resource that might be overlooked elsewhere. And I wonder if you could talk about your job fair and some of the successes that came from that.
Absolutely. So we have for 5 years done a regular job fair in March each year. We get a few hundred people coming. It's terrific. A lot of high school and college kids, a lot of seasonal placement, but especially a few years ago when all the H-2B issues really started coming up, we put together a committee with people from the chamber, people from the larger resorts, and some members of the Committee on Aging in Kennebunk, and created a retired workers job fair. We had our first one last year with the intention that, Kennebunk is the oldest town in the state. We're super excited about that. But we have so many great people there who have retired there, and some younger retirees, and people who have so much to give back. And so we thought, let's put this together, let's think about it, let's really work on it, let's get the message out. And so our first retired workers fair last year, we had 150 people kind of cram into the senior center. We figured 20 were there for the free lunch, but the rest of the people were so excited that there were all these businesses that really valued them. They were, one woman owned her own nursery and greenhouse in Connecticut, had this big business, and is now working. She was hired immediately by one of the inns to do all their landscaping and gardening. We have people that were captains of industry who really just don't want to retire and kind of sit there. So it's a combination of people who would love some extra income in the season, and people who just wanted to be valued and get back out there and greet people. So jobs from, a retired contractor who does maintenance for one of the hotels, and, people doing front desk. So we found that literally dozens of people, one resort hired 12 people on the spot, and they have had tremendous success. Our entire seasonal staff is, retired people who love to work for that season. The feedback we receive from all the employers is that the work ethic was amazing. They don't have to go back to college in August, so that they weren't forcing places to close down early, that they were, just such valued employees that even more have been rehired this year. And our second job fair was just a couple weeks ago, and we had 3 times the number of businesses coming and trying to hire those people, so much so that we had to turn people away. So it doesn't fill the huge niche, but at least it fills a piece of it for us that we feel people can do elsewhere.
You said you had three times the number of businesses. What about the number of job seekers? Did that increase as well?
I think about the same this year, pretty much. We had more. What was interesting is that we had more of the retired workers come to our regular job fair in addition to this one. So last year we had very few retired workers come to the general one. We were told that we don't want to come hang out with 15-year-olds kind of thing, but I think we did have probably 4 times as many come to the regular job fair, and then just as many come to the retired workers fair.
Sure. Greg, I think the one thing that our Hospitality Maine has done is set up an apprenticeship program, or is in setting up an apprenticeship program. And do you think that helps solve the immediate kind of need here, or how does that advance, the workforce issue?
Well, it would be wonderful if it did meet the immediate need, but obviously by the virtue of what an apprenticeship program is, it certainly won't help immensely immediately, but some of the people who are participating in the apprenticeship program or will be participating will be incumbent employees, so it really is an opportunity for them to upgrade their skills as well. And as you mentioned, we have been approved by the Maine Department of Labor to operate an apprenticeship program. Generally, they're done within the Department of Labor, but we were afforded the opportunity to be able to actually manage the program for them. So we hired Terry Hayes, who is a former gubernatorial candidate and also the state treasurer, who's fantastic, very dynamic, very interested in both the success of the program for young people and middle-aged and older people that participate, but also for the employers as well. So obviously you have to have a group of people that are participating to start with, and she has achieved that by getting what we had hoped to get, which is 30 businesses that would be willing to participate in the apprenticeship program, because there's a fair amount of work associated with documentation, making sure people are on the right page, and that they actually have done the things that they have been required to do. So now there are a few people in those businesses that are interested in the apprenticeship program. Now it'll be taking it on the road to the CTEs and other areas to try to get people involved. It isn't going to be an immediate fix, but I think the problem with our industry sometimes is that we are always looking for immediate fixes, and sometimes strategy needs to be part of the process, and I believe this to be that. The Maine Tourism Association is also looking into doing stuff internally in the country, looking at some other than H-2B in-country extensions, working with other chambers and Department of Labors in other state and other types of situations for employment. A lot of the people here in the state of Maine own places down south where they have relationships with people, so a lot of people come in that way as well, always have, and trying to make sure that they continue to do so. But certainly so many people are in this position that it's a free-for-all. It's kind of a scrum trying to get the number of people that you need to work. So we're hoping to seed that with our apprenticeship program and hopefully make life easier in the future.
Yeah, I think Greg makes a good point. There's the apprenticeship program is a wonderful opportunity and a really great landmark program, and we're really happy to be able to be one of those 30 businesses, and we're looking forward to it. It reminds me a lot of an internship program we set up years ago, and we were doing really well. The University of New Hampshire, because we're so far south, but suddenly all of those kids got really heavily recruited to stay in New Hampshire as the market gets really tight, and I think this will really open up a different way for people to excel in an industry that has really wonderful careers. So I like that it's this long game and this more strategic approach to cultivation in the industry, and I support it. I think it's really wonderful, and Terry has done a wonderful job with that. But there is no silver bullet. I often describe hiring for this particular industry, and it's the one I'm in, so it's difficult for me to say if it translates, but let me know out there if you hear this resonate. It's like a wedding cake, you've got your layer of your year-round full-time and part-time employees that are here, they live here, and they help us do our business year-round. And then you've got, the next layer, and you've got the next layer and the next layer, and the only way to make that beautiful cake is you've got to have a lot of layers. You've got to have a lot of opportunities and be proactive, and you do have to do more than just run the ad. And that was even true back in, 08, 09, and 10. You really have to be thinking about cultivation. I think that's a good thing for a business to be thinking about, how do I access and retain good workforce, because it makes you responsible to the people that you hire, to think about they could go elsewhere, and how do I make sure that I'm delivering an experience for them that helps them be fulfilled and use their skills.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the professionalism aspect of it, because I've always wondered if there's kind of a logical leap you have to make to say, I'm going to have this seasonal job, but why don't I get a full-time job where I can move up the ladder somewhere? And, am I really going to depend on coming back and, cleaning rooms or working the front desk or doing whatever at a hotel or a restaurant or on a road crew or something? Do you think, how do you get around that? How do you convince people that these are careers, that they're good jobs, and you don't have to just kind of do it part-time almost?
Well, in the H-2B program in that land, the folks that are coming in for that program, the quality of life and what they're able to do here is remarkable. And I really, on a qualitative point, really have a affinity for the program, in the sense that if somebody's coming to, a lot of people come from Jamaica, it's a popular country, and they can work for 7 months here and go home and be able to buy a house and send their kids to great schools and great colleges and talk about the amazing experience that they had here and do that, and it trickles through that economy. It makes that place a better place in the world, in addition to the fact that they're here and that job has all the bonuses and benefits and everything that you'd have if you were with us year-round. There's no differentiation between, once you plug in seasonally, at least to our business, and I know it's true of a lot of my fellow businesses in Ogunquit, that whether you're year-round or seasonal, we don't label you as that. It's just that's the time frame that we need you for, but your experience with us is the same. The bonus program, all of that is the same.
Yeah, and I would say, there are a lot more year-round businesses than you would think. Probably 3/4 of them are operating year-round, not at the same level, obviously, as others. But I think that the hospitality industry is probably the most upwardly mobile business that exists. Bob Smith came into town here back in the 1980s and went to work at the Holiday Inn by the Bay as a night porter, and now owns Tabasco Harbor Resort. And granted, not all those stories are the same. I worked for seasonal people in Booth Bay, incidentally, with H-2B workers. So anybody who thinks that H-2B workers are some sort of new discovery, they've been around since the 50s. And business models like Allyson's business were built on the fact that there was additional seasonal help that came in to help. So it's always been an issue. Of course, when you get to the point where we are, it's exacerbated. But I would argue that if you go to work in a seasonal business and you spend some time there and you learn a few things, and then you move on to something that's a little bit more year-round, which is exactly what I did, the sky's the limit if you're willing to put the effort.
I also think that it depends, as Allyson said, how the businesses are treating their employees and how they're made to feel. And I know in our community we have the Nonantum, and they do an amazing job with training programs, with really bringing people up with. Bringing them up in different careers and guiding them. Their general manager herself kind of started out there one summer and is now running it. But it's I think how you make those people feel. They get extensive training. They have automatic kind of CPR training. They have a lot of different benefits, and the atmosphere there is very different from a lot of other places. So their retention rate is really huge. But also this winter they added a winter job fair, knowing that they closed for those 4 months, helping their employees who needed it find work to kind of take them over the winter so they come back again. So I think it's that kind of caring and that level of dedication to the employees that do make them come back and consider that their career.
Instead of just saying, see ya next May.
Yeah, because they're going right back to the same place. So,
right.
Yeah, it's
right.
great.
And I can think of, we had someone who's again started at the bottom, is running in catering, and has gone all the way up to she owns 2 of her own properties now, and that was her lifelong dream, and she that's it, and she's successful. And she now comes and says to me, oh, all of those hiring challenges, whoa. But she gets it. But I've also had, some of these people that have come and worked for the summer for me have gone on and they work for the Clintons and cities, or they're running clubs in Florida. And so it casts a wide net on where people want to go and where they can go. And I think that in Maine, we do an exceptionally good job of delivering hospitality and tourism. That's sort of one of our core strengths here as a state. And I think that's due all the way down to the micro level of the Nonantums and other properties that are really leading the way on how do I take good care of people that are here. There's a CEO of a tremendously huge hedge fund out in Chicago that said, I'm really good at finding people and helping them find their passion and facilitate connecting those things for them. And if somebody shows up and works for me, I had someone work for me at my front desk for years, and she was a rock star. But her passion was to become a nurse, and we just made sure we could facilitate her getting her studies. She came back to ask for an updated recommendation this past summer, and she recommends people to come and work at the hotel all the time. And that's just worth its weight in gold, that she is happy and out there. The world needs a better nurse when someone wants to be a better nurse or be a nurse than it does somebody sitting at a front desk that's just a transitional thing for them. And so I'm okay with it, but she's going to send me the person who loves to be at my front desk. And I think that's a win all the way around.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, to your point too, I did poll like a lot of our members before I came, just because things changed a lot. And one thing that more people are doing is when they're onboarding people, they create like a gift package with logoed materials, t-shirts, hats, whatever it may be that are affiliated with the property, maybe like a dinner for two in the facility to come and try it out before they actually work there. And conversely, as you said, instead of just like letting the door hit them in the on the way out, they sent them a gift when they leave too, for thanking them for their service, something a little bit different than what they did before, because it is really all about creating a connection with people to get them to come back. And to your point about the Nonantum, one of the things that Jean and Tina pointed out were that if you do that to young people, they're more apt to tell other young people, including their own family members. I mean, you're looking at a potentially anywhere from a 4 to a 6 year employee if you handle them correctly, and they could very easily hand it off to the next kid in their family. So it's very important to make sure that you see that with young people, for sure.
Great. We kind of dipped our toe into the H-2B issue, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it because it is a critical part of this. We'll do questions at the end. So if you're not aware, H-2B visas they're for foreign temporary workers. They're roughly 6 months, about half a year. The government offers up 66,000 every year. That's split in half. The issue is that as Maine isn't alone. Workforce shortages are everywhere. Seasonal workforce shortages are everywhere across this country. This program has become so overprescribed that when they opened it up for the 33,000 visas on January 1st, it crashed the system. And it took, I think, a day or two to get it back up because so many people were applying for this. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security opened up 30,000 additional visas, but the program is heavily used in Maine, and it's every year it seems like there's something wrong with it.
And it's different every year.
And it's different every year. That's right. That's
you
right.
Got to be on your toes.
Yeah. So, Laura, you were explaining one of your members was recruiting very heavily in the Philippines, and then about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, Department of Homeland Security said Filipinos are going to be ineligible for H-2B.
Yep, they were on the ground recruiting and got the word that was pulled. So,
right.
To them trying to change midstream was not necessarily possible. So they're going into the season at a deficit trying to fill those spots.
Right. So, a lot of this is recruiting local workers, but I'm just interested from the three of you, what would you like to see change, and maybe one change that you'd like to see done in the H-2B program that would not solve everything, but make it just a little bit easier for you.
Increase the cap.
Yeah, Greg and I will.
Do you want to explain what you're talking about when you say that?
So the H-2B program has been around, as Greg's mentioned, since the 50s. It's not a new program, and its last major, I would say, iteration change was about the 80s, and since then it's been in its more or less form. And we've been using the program since the mid-late 90s, and it really allowed us to become, from 40 rooms in an indoor pool, 144 rooms, and a successful year-round resort. And so that's a generation of change, and that's what really that program does, is it allows businesses to really have this stable factor when there's this compressed seasonality, and have that really support the growth that then goes from 2 year-round jobs to over 35 year-round jobs. And so when you think about it, that is that little extra supplement that makes that happen, and we need that in Maine. But the program has this cap of the $33,000 for the summer season. That's anybody who has a need a season after April 1st. And that's just not enough for the whole country. It really didn't affect CAP in terms of 08 and 09 and 10 when we had the recession. But having been in this business and around this program since 03, 04, we've seen 2 very compressed peak cycles where we're dealing with this low unemployment. It absolutely is critical. And even in that time period where unemployment was higher, we still only had 1 person apply for these jobs, 1 U.S. worker. And it's got the guardrails of having to advertise and give these jobs to any U.S. employee that applies across the country, by the way. And what it really needs is it needs to modernize its number. 66, whatever that math was that worked in the 80s, we're not the same country. And we're not the same at all. Maine isn't the same at all. Our population isn't the same at all. And we need to see that modernized and changed. There is a number. We've all been doing the math, and it's just how do we get there? Could there be a couple extra guardrails around performance within the program? Yeah, but that's not the crust of the problem. The problem is that the cap is outdated and needs to be increased.
Right, and we've worked very closely with the delegation here in the state of Maine. Actually, Senator Collins was involved back in 03 and 04. She was the stalwart on the program, along with Senator Barbara Mikulski from Maryland. And since then, she's been very helpful to us. Senator King gets it. Representative Pingree has been fantastic. Representative Golden is still new, so he's kind of like assessing the situation, but Representative Poliquin was helpful as well. So we've had advocates there to help us, and obviously our 2 senators are highly respected, so that's really helped us a lot. To me, besides raising the cap, consistency in the way the program is administered, because that's back to how things change every year. You don't know what the heck's going to happen. And so, all of a sudden DHS decides, well, there's so many more people that need H-2B visas than what we have to give them. We're going to have a lottery. So it used to be if you were expeditious, you got all your information on time, you filed everything properly, you were at the head of the line. Okay, so at this point in time, you may be at the head of the line to be certified, but now you go into this lottery to decide who actually gets the visas in that crowd. So if that's not confusing enough, now the Department of Labor decides, well, if they can have a lottery, why can't we have a lottery? So now you basically have no basis at all for being able to plan in your business because they've taken that away. I believe that increasing the cap takes away a lot of the pressures in the system and maybe makes a lot of these things go away. They did increase the cap to $30,000. The last 2 years, what's happened is Congress was given the ability to raise the cap, which they have not done. So they've deferred to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, and she ancient history, DHS Secretary Flynn actually raised it by $15,000 the first year, and then Secretary Nielsen did last year. And so this year she announced that she's going to raise it by $30,000 because she did get it. She didn't want to admit it too much, but she did get it because the administration's not, I don't think, a huge fan. And then, of course, she abruptly resigns and kind of leaves us in a position where we had no idea what was going to happen. Thankfully, we heard yesterday that they're going to do the rulemaking process. The first year they did the rulemaking process, it lasted longer than most of the summer. People literally didn't get the extra people until September. Last year it went much better. This year we hope, now that things seem to be moving in the right direction, that it will have an impact, because if people are coming in June and July, it's not ideal, but at least they're coming. If they're coming in August and September, it's not worth the bother.
And just how that rolls up, we have businesses in Algonquin that should be serving lunch and dinner 7 days a week. And they don't have the staff. They can't find the staff. In fact, some of them had, because we just came out of a school vacation period, have had their teams work, a busier period. And they lost half their staff because it's just too much. And they didn't get their H-2Bs. And so they're not serving lunch. They're barely serving dinner. The tax revenue on that is never coming back, because the meals last week are not getting served next week. That's it. And so this has impact. It really does. That we are not able to get out of the gate on time when we should, because the reliability of this program doesn't exist. And cap relief would certainly help that quite a bit, because there'd be enough at least to do this. And just to clarify a little bit on what you said, to put it in perspective, you go to the Department of Labor on January 1st to say, I have seasonality. I think we can all agree Maine has seasonality. And then you go and you say, and I can't find people. And so I want the permission. I want you to bless me to go look for people. And if I can't do it, allow me the opportunity to go get these visas. And you have to keep recruiting even now until the H-2B worker shows up. You could have paid for this visa, all of this expense, et cetera. And if a U.S. worker showed up today and said, I want that job, you have to give it to the U.S. worker, and you don't get a refund on having participated in the program. And what happens there is we aren't doing it because it's the easy way out. It's actually the harder way out. But we're doing it because there isn't another answer right now for this layer of the cake. And when you certify your need and you say, I absolutely cannot find this person, and then there's nothing there, it's like saying, I am dying of thirst, and you could give me water, but you're not. And that is really hard to see happening, and it really doesn't make any sense when you think about an economy like Maine's or Maryland's crabbing industry or Alaska's fishing industry, right? When the fish come for 4 weeks, they're not changing their migration pattern because people didn't have their workforce and they wanted to show up, 2 weeks from then. The fish are coming. Just like here, the tourists are coming. So what do we do? And if the product's not consistent or open, that person next year in April is probably never going to go to that restaurant and try them for lunch because they figure they're not open for it. It's going to take years to get that back. We need these things to work, and I'd like to see them fix it. They can. We've been advocating it for a long time. We'll see.
I also think that, people sometimes think, H-2B visas and they're here taking jobs from other people or, they're people that just want to come in and make money. But the reality is, as you mentioned, that we just can't fill all those jobs, particularly housekeeping and kitchen jobs. And, we had one housekeeper who's experienced show up at a job fair, and literally an innkeeper chased her down the steps to offer her a bonus and hire her on the spot. We cannot fill that. And a couple summers ago, when we hit the cap again, we had managers cleaning toilets and changing beds, and people are still going to come, and you still have to have clean rooms, and you have to have clean dishes and things like that. But at the same time, a lot of these workers have come for generations. We have a resort group that did not get their visas this year, and they have had generations of the same family return every year, and this year are scrambling because they're not coming. So those resort groups have made a commitment to those employees, the same as they've done to other people, but those employees in turn have made a commitment to Maine and the hospitality industry. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, and to those people that think that it's easier to do it this way, you can pay anywhere between $2,000 and $3,000 per worker and still not get anybody.
Yeah. So, that's the reality of it. It's not the easy way out. The easiest employee is the one that walks in and says, I would like a job. And there aren't a lot of those in Maine. And as we just did, we opened this with talking about numbers of that. And so this is a very expensive way to do it. But if you are using it, and I like to look at the long game, as does, my dad, my family, is that we've been able to participate in this and grow the business to where we are today. And if we hadn't been able to, in 2004, when there was no idea of what cap relief would be, I sat down and did a business plan for, okay, if there's no cavalry, what does it look like to operate the Meadowmere Resort in 2004, which was a peak market, and with zero seasonal help. And we go back to 1986, which is 40 rooms and an indoor pool, and 2 year-round employees. And what does that mean when you take a 35 year-round employee business and all the tax revenue that is, but also all the quality of life that is for all those people, and throw it back 30 years? Mm-hmm. Now do that across the state. So these programs have importance, and we want that. We need that. We should advocate for it. And really, if you have a lot of questions about this program or how to help, make sure this is one of those ones where the rhetoric gets really ratcheted up, but the bones of this is really important.
Mm-hmm. If I could, there's kind of two other issues here that I think we've all talked about, or independently, or but one of them has to do with Maine kind of has also a geography issue, right? You have these very, very popular, for the hospitality industry specifically, you have these very popular coastal towns that have very small year-round populations, and then you have kind of pockets, maybe an hour and a half away, where, there might be people who would be really interested in those jobs, but the transportation isn't there. Yeah. And now with the popularity of short-term rentals, Airbnb, VRBO, some of that housing that used to be there for seasonal workers doesn't exist anymore either. Yeah. How do we get our hands around that? And is there anything being done to kind of address some of those geographical constraints that we're dealing with?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to this. So, always looking out over the bow, right? I mean, that's the best thing I can help do for my team and my business is what's going to look like, 1, 2, 3 years from now. What's the impact on this going to be? And, a number of years ago, I think it was 2013, I said, we're headed in this direction. This is going to be an interesting thing. And I had, through fellow Notre Dame grads, spoken about what's called impact investing, and the idea of virtuous cycles in your community to solve problems. And so I came back and spearheaded a group with fellow businesses to deal with where can we find pockets of people that need employment that we haven't discovered yet. And one of those areas, using some of my background experience at Notre Dame, was I went to what I consider the hardest population to employ, which are homeless. And they desperately need a job, because the way to get a voucher for state housing is you need a job. And so these things should come together. And I sat down with about 24 people, and I said, I have 5 openings for part-time and year-round jobs with benefits right now, and you need a job. How have we not come together yet? And they said, look, it's really great, but I don't have a way to get there. And I don't even want to get there just for an interview or get there just for day one and then have this whole patchwork system of how I get from A to B and back again fall apart on me, because I can't do that anymore. I'm not in a place where I have any kind of resilience, right? This is a really hard place for someone to be in. And that's also why it gets institutionalized across generations. I did a lot of work in the South Bend Homeless Center in my undergraduate. And so I said, well, what's your skill set? And they had great skill sets. I mean, HVAC. We've talked about the HVAC community, the lighting, heating, and plumbing, and all that. And they had housekeeping skills. They had front desk skills. And so I said, well, what's transportation look like? And as we did this as 5 businesses, we created this initiative. We actually found a solution for 362 days of the year, twice a day, into Agunquit. So that's pretty much year-round, into Agunquit. And I don't know if you guys have been to Agunquit in this summer, but it's sort of a traffic bog Dugal. We're known for that. And hooked in 4 more communities all the way on the western side of York County in. And the difference in the problem with that was those quasi-public-private facilitators of transportation can't use their state money for workforce development. Imagine that. And 24 people who are most in need. And so when you think about it, that's just it's a 6-word change, actually, in some of our statute and at state level to solve that. That's the stuff we need, because you turn on the ability to connect to where people can afford to live, to where people can work, and you solve problems. It took years to get to this point. By the way, remember I said I started with dialogues, informal dialogues in 2013. I think we formulated in 2015. So it takes a long time to do this work, but that's the stuff we need to solve, because that ties in the people that need that to be able to plug into the workforce, and we need them. We need them. It also turns on housing, and those are those underlying things. When you look at a macro level that people say, why aren't young people moving to Maine? 2 of the biggest things in someone's budget are transportation and housing. That eats up most of what you go to work for, and that's true any time. And if we have to find ways to connect where it's affordable, especially in southern Maine, to live, and transportation to turn on the ability to work here. And those are really core, fundamental, really deep building blocks. Yeah. But that's important work.
And people will only go so far. That's the thing that we've discovered. Like in Bar Harbor, there is the Island Explorer, but there's also shuttles that are put forth by private companies. And people will drive 20 minutes to Ellsworth and get on the shuttle and go to work. But beyond that, we've tried working like with Millinocket when the mill closed. And people don't want to leave their families to go overnight and stay somewhere. And I totally understand that. Yep. And so it doesn't necessarily always work in our favor. People are still buying housing. The Airbnb, seasonal rental kind of situation is making it more and more difficult for people to do that. But I've talked to several people this year that really kind of gulped hard and purchased something so that they have a place to put whoever these people are. Could be HGB, could be somebody from New Hampshire, it could be anybody, just somebody that they could have work for.
We do. Back in that 2013, we actually built over for ourselves more than what we needed seasonal housing, and one of them we actually operate year-round, and some of our year-round staff chooses to rent and live there, and then we have seasonal staff that comes in there. And so we saw that the Airbnb writing was on the wall, that it was going to make Ogunquit not the cheapest place, even more expensive and more difficult, and you have to kind of be looking out for those things, and we have to start talking about those long-term solutions and putting them in place.
And I think that we're struggling with the same exact thing. I mean, the infrastructure and the lack of transportation. We identified even Sanford and Biddeford. They literally border the Kennebunks, and yet we have not been able to put together any kind of meaningful transportation. We know that there's cheaper housing there, that there is an abundance of housing in a way that there just isn't in the Kennebunks. But we have not, we actually just lost our York County Community Action bus route this year, because they're going to take those funds and put it toward senior transportation, because again, we're old. But trying to get younger people in, trying to get some workforce housing started, but even just being able to get some kind of transportation over the border has been impossible, where we know there are other employees and we know there's less expensive housing. So coming up with those solutions for that funding is really key.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about that. I live in Biddeford, and I was just, that's so wild to me that we can't even kind of cross that bridge, and it seems so easy to do.
We have to start making connectivities between our communities, and that will help us greatly.
So if anyone has a bus.
So I don't know if we've solved any problems, so we've certainly enumerated them and put some ideas out there. So we have a microphone in the middle here. We're going to take questions for about 15 minutes, or for about 15 minutes. I know Greg has to leave promptly at 9. So if you want to come up, that would be great. Could you just say who you are and where you work or where you're from before you ask your question?
Hi, I'm Tony Payne, again from MEMIC. And so I think we've got an idea of the problem. You've done a very good job in articulating that. I'd like to know, how many folks here are employers of seasonal workers? Okay. What do we need to do in order to get the change you've described that has to occur? What do we need to do specifically? I know Leslie Merrill is here from Congresswoman Pingree's office. I assume that these are policy issues, but what else do we need to do?
I'm glad you asked that because that was my other question that we didn't get to. So thank you very much.
I mean, I think I won't cover it from the employer. I'll let these ladies handle, the employers and stuff. And I know Steve will agree with me. Steve Humans will agree with me on this one. I mean, it's raising the profile of the industry for what this industry contributes to the state. We still don't necessarily get, I guess, or command the respect that we should. And we need to work very hard on that. I was very happy to hear that the Department of Labor reached out to us to find out if there was something they could do to help us. That's not a common occurrence. We're usually fighting it out on our own. So I think that there needs to be policy changes in Augusta that reflect not just the hospitality industry, but just industry in general, transportation issues, getting people from and to. There's a lot of emphasis on the career and technical education programs. There's probably about a dozen bills that have been put forth to either fund or facilitate or upgrade or whatever it may be on the career and technical education side, which is where a lot of our employees would come from. It's people are starting to see the importance when they call 5 people to get their toilet fixed and nobody can come because they're too busy, that the issue for this goes along, far beyond the tourism and hospitality industry. We need to really focus on the trades and jobs that can help people transition or become careers to them moving forward. So I'm hoping, I don't know that I can withstand the number of bills that we got this time. Speaking of getting old, 2,000 bills is a lot of bills to process, and that's just in the first year, but it's really where it's going to have to come from.
Yeah, I agree, Greg. There's like I said, this is a 6-word change in a statute to allow some funds to be spent on workforce transportation, which if the bus is going from Lyman to Ogunquit, other people are going to go on the bus. It's not just going to be for this one segment. We're not siloing it. And so we have to look at those little tweaks that are going to make the system work better. That's how you set a flywheel in motion and put a virtuous cycle in place. And so I do think that those are important things. At the H-2B level, telling them that they advocating that they really have to address and fix that. Some of the changes that are going to come on the horizon that will drop in the summer when people are busy and it's hard to pay attention, and I get it, I really, really do, are going to make next year worse. That's terrifying to me. And so we have to say, hey, this needs to get fixed. It needs to get fixed. And the programs that we haven't talked about, J1, needs to be protected. And then the idea that what are these simple changes that can help us facilitate it? Some of them are policy, but also within a business, what can you do that makes sure that your onboarding process is something that really shows that this is a valued place to be, and what is it that you're doing that makes yourself a unique business? So I'm in a hyper competitive market, right? I have 2,500 hotel rooms in 4 square miles. The Route 1 for 2.3 miles is all competitors where people can go and they can do this task work, right? Cleaning a room is cleaning their room is cleaning a room. There's no difference in that level, but am I making that a better experience for them? So we're an environmental leader. So we have, non-aerosol products, all green products in there. So it's a healthier environment, right? I'm able to say that to them than maybe going up the street to somebody who hasn't paid attention to that. We have a bonus program. What does that look like? Does it seem fair? Is it clear? Is it equitable? So sometimes it's a little introspective as an employer to know what is it that you're projecting out to make sure that that's something that's of value to the population that could come and work for you. We don't have a high school, so I don't have a lot of youth coming my way, but we are one of the older communities, and we do have some seniors, so how can we make adjustments? So proactiveness is really, really key. But there's still no silver bullet. You got to do it all.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Hanson-Mahoney of Blazing Trails Coaching, and my core clients are people in the trades. And one of the issues that they have challenge with is that there are kids who want to work, however, their school schedules are not permitting them to be able to work. They have a cap on how many hours that they are permitted to work. Some of them are not getting work permits released from their principals and the superintendents. And we discussed in a forum similar to this last summer, going to the schools and talking to them about, they're going to school through June, and they are picking school back up in August. And so therefore, they cannot work a seasonal job because it's just too short of a season. What are we doing as parents, as teachers, as administrators to encourage that work is just a viable pathway to education as a college path?
I think, too, a lot will depend on the school district. In the Kennebunks, we rely really heavily on our youth employment, but the school has been very responsive to that with alternative education programs. We have programs where the kids are pretty much out in the workforce all day long. A lot of the hospitality folks around us have those kids work for them. They become really valuable parts of the staff, but in exchange, they receive a lot of valuable information. So they've instituted multiple different programs there that allow them to go into the field every day and do sort of less traditional classroom work, because not every kid is on a college track. My brother's an electrician. He's always made more than me and been a lot more in demand than I have been. So,
make $140,000.
Yeah. So I think it's supporting that. It's communities encouraging the schools to get, kind of get with the programs and think about those things. I think it took a few years for us to get there, even in Kennebunk. And a lot of it is having the businesses get involved. We had a business school committee that we created a couple of years ago. We spent a lot of time talking about different careers. They created the sort of the Kennebunk thing where they put together a whole separate community in 6th grade and bring the kids in and kind of have them run a town for a day. And that just extends straight up through the high school level with kids understanding all the different careers. They've added a sort of non-traditional career fair this year. So we had pulled together a lot of our electricians, if we could get them to have a spare moment, and a lot of contractors and landscaping crews, and had them talk to kids starting freshman year about different career alternatives and where you go with this. So I think it's, the businesses themselves too going to the schools and saying, let's talk about what this needs to look like for the future.
And I just point out that last year the Department of Labor had a program to effectively subsidize wages for teen workers, and especially I think 14 and 15-year-olds. And I think that was pretty limited. I think it created around 73 jobs. And there's still some money left over, so I think they're doing it again this year.
I'm glad you said that, because another thing that we didn't touch on was there was for our industry, a very reasonable bipartisan approach to helping us last year, because 14-year-olds were only allowed to work on the grounds of hotels. They could work in a restaurant,
right.
But they couldn't work in a restaurant in a hotel. Go figure. And so they actually got together, and the statute still does not allow young people, 14 and 15-year-olds, to go into rooms, and we support that 100%. Yeah. I never would think that that's a good idea, but the statute used to say they couldn't go in the hallways to rooms. Yeah. So at the Nonantum, the kitchen is in a hallway to the rooms, and so they couldn't go to the break room at the Nonantum, and they couldn't go in the kitchen. So I think some of these things are just practical sense, kind of let's just fix the low-hanging fruit and make everybody have a little more equity in the system. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, you're great. I think you really just said something that I was going to say. It's, if I would love to be able to hire more 14 and 15-year-olds and give them their first job and have them get underway, especially because it teaches, you get your paycheck, it teaches you financial literacy, right? This is something that's happening at the state level. That's a big buzzword, but you have a paycheck, you learn, what do I want to do with my money? And wow, look at all those things that come out of it. And you also, and you also learn about the responsibility of being on time and being accountable to things. And you also, in our industry, and several other ones, interact with people. How do I accommodate what I need to achieve, but also how do I make this person feel like they've got something of value? And these are all great life skills that people need, and getting them at 14, 15 is wonderful. but they weren't allowed to go down my hallways, and I can't get them anywhere because that's how you get everywhere in a hotel, and that was one problem. And then, of course, there was a lot of restrictions around the hours and the number of hours and when they could work, and that doesn't always play into when you could have them come and work a 3 or 4 hour part-time shift that would be not competing with their schools studies, but it's outside of this regulated time frame that's available. So now you're stuck, and those are the tweaks that are really helpful in changing the landscape. Not huge issues, but just these little adjustments that help us get that flywheel.
Okay, I think that's going to do it for us. Let's give a hand for our panelists. Thanks for showing up today. Read the Press Herald. We write about this stuff all the time. So if you want to know more, just follow us. And everybody have a good morning. Thanks a lot.